The biggest living thing on the planet is under threat. Rising sea temperatures have killed off vast areas of coral on the Great Barrier Reef. We'll find out if it can recover. I'm Martin Stanford. This is Insight. Welcome to Insight. The Great Barrier Reef is called Great for a reason. It's the world's largest living ecosystem. It covers an area around the same size as Italy, and it's home to a staggering variety of life. 600 types of coral, more than 1,600 kinds of fish. But from rising sea temperatures to the effects of tourism, large areas of it are under threat. Insight's Sarah Firth reports.
With life, bursting with vibrant colours. This is the jewel of the ocean, Australia's Great Barrier Reef. But all of this is under threat.
The biggest threat of the Great Barrier Reef is climate change.
More than 2,000 kilometres long, the reef can be seen from space, and it's home to a huge array of wildlife, with 30 species of whales and dolphins and thousands of species of fish. The world's largest reef system is experiencing the worst crisis in its history, according to many leading Australian scientists.
We've seen now 3 bleaching events on the Great Barrier Reef. The first one was in 1998, the second in 2002, and the third one this most recent summer in 2016. This one is by far the most extreme. And we've seen 3 of these events now with just 1 degree of global warming. So 2 degrees of global warming, which is the international target, is going to be a very challenging place for the Great Barrier Reef.
2016 saw the longest and most widespread coral bleaching event on record, leaving the reef looking like this. If you take a look at this healthy coral, it's covered in tiny marine algae that's essential for the coral's health. Now, if the water temperature in the ocean rises by even a couple of degrees, the algae leaves the coral and you end up with coral bleaching. It turns it white. Now, it's not always irreversible, but in the worst case, it is. Without the algae, the coral can't survive and completely dies. Professional accurist Daniel Pomfret has dived the Great Barrier Reef and highlights the importance of preserving the coral.
If the coral dies, we lose an enormous amount of other species as well in the wild. Fishes will move on. Some species can't survive without them, and it will be just a barren place to be.
But bleaching's not the only threat. These starfish may look harmless enough, but called the crown of thorns, they're no friend of the coral, but an aggressive coral-eating predator. And the threats don't just lurk down here.
Coral not cold! Coral not cold!
On dry land, campaign groups are trying to stop planned coal industry expansions in Australia that would require the seafloor to be dredged. UNESCO, the UN's World Heritage Protection Committee, has stopped just short of placing the Great Barrier Reef on the in danger list. But they warn the outlook is poor and have said they'll be releasing more information in the coming months.
The reef was on UNESCO's in danger watch list, and since that time we've worked very effectively with the Queensland government to put in place the Reef 2050 plan with 151 different initiatives designed to improve the water quality on the reef and to see some $2 billion invested. We're now providing an update to UNESCO, and that report will hopefully see Australia stay off the in danger watch list.
Many experts in the field say there's still not enough political action to curb greenhouse gases.
Nothing is new, nothing has changed, and most importantly, the government is not ready to leave to move away from coal. Coal is the first threat to the Great Barrier Reef, and that's why Greenpeace is calling the Australian government to take action.
A recent study carried out by the Centre for Excellence for Coral Reef Studies estimated that the damage done to the Great Barrier Reef in 2016 alone could take some 10 to 15 years to repair. The warning from those monitoring the Great Barrier Reef and the health of the coral is clear. Time is running out for one of nature's natural wonders, and some say it might already be too late. Sarah Firth reporting for Insight.
Well, to discuss that further, I'm joined now by Professor Graham Shields-Joe from the University College of London's Geology Department. 2016, the worst ever for bleaching at the Great Barrier Reef. Do we know why last year was so bad?
Without a doubt, it was the worst. I mean, I think it's really related to temperatures in the case of the Great Barrier Reef. And we've had warmer ocean temperatures, and we had the double whammy of the El Nino year. And El Nino years are always warmer times. So,
just explain the El Nino phenomenon to us.
Well, the El Nino phenomenon is when upwelling doesn't occur in the Pacific Ocean, which you think might not affect something so far away as Australia. But because there's so much heat in the ocean, these big ocean current changes do affect world temperatures, and because there's no upwelling, the upwelling brings up cold water, and that will affect the temperature of the whole southern hemisphere.
How critical is the water temperature to coral life? I mean, are they sensitive to literally changes of 1 or 2 degrees?
Well, corals are not sensitive. What's sensitive is the algae that live within them. And so they live in symbioses. The symbiotic algae, or dinoflagellates, we call them, they photosynthesize. They're basically small plants. So they provide the food for the corals. When the temperature gets too hot, they jump ship, and then the corals die off because they require that food from those symbiotic algae.
And they don't come back?
Well, they might come back. They might come back when times get cooler, or they may get replaced by a different form of symbiotic algae, which is better adapted to the hotter conditions. So that there could be an exchange of algae in that case.
And if we just pause with that symbiotic relationship for a minute, has that gone back through the beginning of time, or is this a relatively recent phenomenon?
No, certainly not recent. I mean, bacteria, algae, things that photosynthesize have been with us for billions of years. Yeah. And reefs have been with us for billions of years. The very, very first ones are as old as 3.5 billion years ago, also found in Australia, coincidentally enough. So yeah, this symbiotic relationship has basically always been there. Not always with corals, sometimes with sponges, and before that would have been with single-celled protists or other types of organisms.
Do we know enough about how they move from one to one then? I mean, how did the relationship move from sponge to coral?
Well, when we're talking geologically, over millions of years, usually that's because of extinction. So we've had times in the past of really, really hot temperatures, and usually that's related to things like supervolcanic eruptions. So 250 million years ago, there was a supervolcanic eruption in Siberia, and it raised the temperature of the Earth, and then there was a mass extinction of these reef organisms, and then a change from the host organism from one type of coral to the modern type of coral, which is a sclerectinian coral. So it's always been boom and bust for these organisms.
In which case, are the phenomena we see now really that big a deal in the scheme of billions of years of progress and temperatures going up and down?
Well, life on Earth is not going to go away, but I think in terms of our lifetimes and human civilization, I mean, we really don't want to see a mass extinction and things recover a million years later. It wouldn't have any interest for us. I think we're worried about our grandchildren.
The tourist industry in Australia, wouldn't it?
Well, exactly, yeah. So I think that we don't really need to worry about such long time scales in this case. It is a big deal.
For the Australians, of course, they've got a big concern in this. I mean, apart from the sort of care of the planet argument, they do have a very key tourist industry, which is linked to the Great Barrier Reef and all the areas around that. And it's very sophisticated now, and, you know, modern hotel spaces, you can fly in helicopters, you can see this phenomenon any which way, including in the ocean itself, and presumably that's vital to their economy.
Absolutely, but it is a protected area, so all of this tourism is well managed in Australia. I think Australia is one of the examples where we can live in harmony, the tourism and the wildlife.
It has no adverse impacts as far as you can see.
Well, it will have some adverse impacts, but having tourists there learning about the reef and understanding the threats to the reef actually also provides advantage. It's a question of balance. But in terms of reefs in the world, I think the Great Barrier Reef World Heritage Area has a certain degree of protection, and that's very, very good.
And that's only since the sort of United Nations authorities came on board and imposed this, or decided to delegate it.
Well, yes, it was applied for, and the Australian government, of course, is on board, but that can always change in the future. But at the moment, it does enjoy a certain degree of protection, which means there's not going to be any mining anytime soon or drilling through the reef for exploitation of oil.
Would be those
things
people
like that
would queue up to do some mining?
Absolutely, I'm sure there are.
Are there some natural resources underneath all that?
There certainly could be, yes. In any areas of high productivity, there could be oil and gas, which could be explored and exploited. But at the moment, that's just a non-starter because it's a protected area.
In terms of how the fishing industry impacts on this, there are reports which suggest that some fishing techniques disrupt the coral. Is that still the case? In this particularly, let's focus on Australia for the moment.
Well, it's not really an area of my speciality, but again, it does enjoy a certain degree of protection. There are protected fishing areas, and there are areas where you can fish on the Great Barrier Reef, and this is always being looked at by the World Heritage Authority and the Marine Park Authority. So yeah, as I say, it goes beyond my expertise, but I know there are people looking at this.
Yes, I suppose that dragnets or something of that ilk scraping along the ocean floor will damage the coral.
Oh, would be dreadful. Would be dreadful.
It's fairly fragile, this stuff, isn't it?
Absolutely, yes. So this sort of thing is again a no-go area on the Great Barrier Reef. The Great Barrier Reef is a huge place, and of course some fishing is allowed in certain parts of the reef, and in some areas it's less sensitive to disruption, and I hope those areas are the ones that fishermen will be looking at and encouraged to explore. Why
did that amount of coral grow in that or why does it exist in such extensive form in that part of the world? What are the sort of factors that come together to make it an ideal spot for this phenomenon to exist?
Well, again, it's a temperature thing. So to build a reef, a massive reef, you need to have a certain minimum temperature. We usually think of that as an average of about 18 or 20 degrees. So you do need some quite hot waters, but when you get to really, really hot temperatures like 30 degrees, it becomes too much. So corals exist in quite a narrow window of temperatures, and that part of Australia enjoys those kinds of temperatures. The other thing is because of the oscillations between ice ages or glaciations and interglacials that we've had for the last 2 million years, and that is sort of because the sea level has changed by 100 meters from glaciation to interglacial. Yeah, every time we have a glaciation, it happens every 100,000 years, the sea level changes by 120 meters. So the sea level today is 120 meters higher than it was, for example, 20,000 years ago.
Right.
And so with all these oscillations, the reefs have been growing with the rising sea level. And that's why you can find coral reef all the way down to 150 meters. And that's because that's where they would have been growing.
They would have been.
During the glaciation.
As a phenomenon, they only exist in relatively shallow waters, don't they?
Well, corals can exist in deeper waters, but the kinds of corals we're talking about, the massive, the colourful corals that live in symbiosis with photosynthetic algae, yes, they need sunlight. So they can really only exist within the first few tens of meters.
Because the sunlight doesn't penetrate that far down, right?
No, it doesn't. It doesn't. And but as I say, with a rising sea level, then you can make a sort of massive reef over millions of years, and that's what's happened with the Great Barrier Reef.
Graham, we're going to pause our conversation there. Back with you in just a moment. You're watching Insight. Coming up, we look at some of the state of the other coral reefs in the world's oceans.